our paper is actually about Black's zero beta capital asset pricing model, but we're calling it the playing fields because we think that that gives a good conceptual understanding of what is really happening here. Now, let me give you a little bit of background to why we're doing this paper and talking about this stuff. Chris and I, in 2012, presented a paper where we tested the CAPM empirically. We estimated betas for companies and predicted returns using those betas, and then measured those returns against their actual subsequent returns. And we found that actually the CAPM didn't actually work. Now, we published that paper, but we missed one graph, which we subsequently kind of realized we should have put in. And this is that graph, updated to more recent data, but running back to 1985. And so what we're showing you here, in fact, is about 30 years of data. And what we've done is we estimate betas. We put shares into deciles, and we then look at the subsequent return. And you'll see here, what we find here, for example, decile 10 over here, which has got the shares with the highest betas, and these will move around, we rebalance this every quarter, have got the lowest returns. Whereas betas with the lowest, deciles with the lowest betas have got, in fact, much higher returns. So this completely goes against what the CAPM actually shows. If you want to use the CAPM, and you'll remember to estimate the cost of equity, you're going to put the risk-free rate and you're going to add beta times the market risk premium. Now, there's a problem with that, and if you want to use it, and we're not really suggesting this, you need to make a couple of minor corrections. First of all, you might want to take the risk-free rate over here and multiply by about 3. And secondly, instead of adding beta, you want to subtract beta times the market risk premium, and then you'll get something along those lines. I'm just joking, but it gives you a perspective. Now, there's been quite a bit of research on the JSE over the last few years, looking at the CAPM, and we see several people who've said the CAPM doesn't work, or if it does work, it works in a negative way. Van Rensburg, Paul, sitting over there, showed us that in 2001. And confirmed it with his PhD student, Robertson, and published that in 2003. Dave Strugnell, Evan Gilbert, Kruger did a similar study and showed that the CAPM does not work in 2011. And then Chris and I did this in 2012, and if I may say so, showed convincing evidence that actually the CAPM doesn't work. Now, there have been some researchers who have shown that it does work, and notable amongst those, Dave Bradfield and his colleagues, well respected, but they did this in 1981, long before Paul came up with his data over here. Similarly, Van Rijn in 1995 also showed that it did work. But much to our surprise, Barry Stradham and Ali Charteris in 2013 published a paper which said that actually the CAPM does work, and what we really need to do is not use a proxy for the risk-free rate. We need to use a zero beta portfolio, and that's what we're talking about today. We're coming back and we're looking at this and looking to see whether that really does make a difference. And to give you some perspective on that, I want to talk about the playing fields. So just to illustrate this, we're going to use 5 years of monthly data. And we've picked, just to illustrate this section, later on we'll go back and we'll show you the analysis over the full 30-year period, but just to show you what we're talking about. This is in the middle of our sample here. We've got 5 years of monthly data. We've taken just the 60 largest shares over the full period, and we lose actually 6, and to get a proper covariance matrix, we can only use 54. So we're just going to work with 54, and we've got 5 years of monthly returns, which we annualize. If I were to plot that data out, you'd see here is the monthly return, and this is the standard deviation of those 54 shares over that time period. Now, we define this area over here as being the playing field. You could have invested in ShopRite or Astro or Kumba, and you would have been somewhere in this area. But we all know from what Markowitz showed us, that in fact, if you build an efficient frontier around here, and we're just showing you our efficient frontier here, you can actually do a little bit better than investing in one share by building a portfolio. And so you can see you can get the same return with ShopRite over here by taking on, in fact, some other shares. You get less risk, the same return, but less risk and so on. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with all of this, and we haven't shown it, but of course this efficient frontier goes right round back here. You could have had some really bad portfolios, but you would have needed to be somewhere in the red range over here if you were going to use a simple, unconstrained Markowitz efficient frontier. Now, most people are only interested in the top part of this curve from the minimum variance portfolio right the way around here. And by combining these shares and assuming that covariance matrix remains the same and that their returns also are going to be the same, so quite a few constraints in here, you could pick a nice portfolio somewhere on this efficient frontier. Now, just to show you, if you start applying some constraints, and all we've done here is we've said this is like a unit trust now. You can only put 5% into your portfolio. This green area here then represents a playing field in which we've constrained the maximum holdings to only 5%. So if you're a unit trust fund, for example, you have to, amongst other constraints, obey that one. And unit trust funds could only have fitted within this playing field. The good news is that your returns could be as high as this, but in a sense, you'd never get up to where you could have been if you hadn't had the constraints here. But the good news is that you can only be that bad. And we could, in fact, plot all the unit trusts in this playing field if we looked at them, see how they did do. But you don't get the red line. Now, we have got other constraints we could use as well. If we, for example, were to use not a 5% holding, but drop this down to, whoa, not that, a Swix tracking error of, say, 5%, we get this brown playing field over here. And this is actually better because we can get higher return than we could with the green here. And over here as well, we could get less downside risk. We lose a little bit on the upside over here, but a Swix tracking error of less than 5% gives us actually a much better playing field. So we could also drop the Swix tracking error down to, say, 2%. If we do that, we're really constrained. We're sitting here within these little brackets that we're showing you over here, and you're basically going to struggle to earn any performance fees from that. You might as well be just taking a Satrix position or something like that. So the minute we start applying constraints, the playing field drops a lot. But we can also loosen some constraints, and if we allow short selling, and we still got some constraints in here, this is the maximum 20% long and minus 20% min that we could have from a long-short hedge fund. If you do that, you get a very attractive playing field here. It goes even higher than this, and one could understand that there might be investors who would be very keen to sit somewhere up here with a 50% return and very little risk. But this portfolio is going to probably be made out of a couple of shares which happen to be long, offset by a couple of other shares which are very short, and will have a lot of risk for the following period. It's great if you know what's going to happen, but if you get it wrong, well, you could equally be very far down in these regions over here. So you take on a lot more risk by doing that. But I'm showing you this because if you want to build a zero beta portfolio, which we're going to do just now, you need to have short selling in. You need to be able to short some shares in the portfolio. So with all of this as background here, let me just show you. Chris, in fact, put this together here whilst we're talking about hedge funds. This is the hedge fund playing field as of the end of 2016. And you can see, in fact, this efficient frontier is actually made up of the returns and standard deviations of combinations of these hedge funds. And there's some very good ones up here. Some of Peregrine's look great. And there are some very bad ones over here as well. You can have a look at those a little later if you're interested. Now, we want to find the optimal portfolio here. And as you will know, it was James Tobin who introduced the risk-free rate to Markowitz's efficient frontier. And to do that, we need to maximize the Sharpe ratio. So to do that, we're going to calculate the returns in the portfolio and the standard deviation of the portfolio. I'm just showing here the matrix algebra that we're using in Excel to do that. And but at the same time, we want to put in some constraints. We're going to use, for our purposes, a tracking error of no more than 5%. So against the SWIX, that is. So if you look at the results of that now, here again, this is the same 5% SWIX tracking playing field that we saw earlier here, but we're now putting in a risk-free rate over here. And for the time being, we're going to assume it's a conventional one here. We're going to use, say, the T-bill rate, average T-bill rate or something like that. And if we drop our tangent to this line here by optimizing the Sharpe ratio, which is this return against this risk, that's the optimal Sharpe ratio, maximum Sharpe ratio that we can put in here, given our constraints, we're going to get this particular portfolio, and we get our capital allocation line over here. So this is the kind of basis that the CAPM kind of rests on. Now, just to show you, our optimal portfolio would be largely made up of ShopRite there. These are SWIX weightings and a bit of PPC, Mr. Price, Standard Bank, and so on. And but if we're going to switch now from a conventional risk-free rate to using the zero beta portfolio risk-free rate that Chartris and Stratum are suggesting, in fact originally from Black, then we can in fact choose any one of these here. So what I'm showing you here, Chris and I have constructed the efficient zero beta portfolios here, and you can see these are very attractive positions to be in. In fact, there are probably some further out here where you've got a almost 40% return with very little risk, and more importantly, there is no market risk here. We've got zero beta. If you like, you can think of this as a sort of pair trading type position. You've got some long shares and offsetting those with short shares, and we can actually get a zero beta. Now, if you look at this as well, you'll see that the minimum variance point is somewhere over here, and that is actually going to give us a negative risk-free rate, which is unlikely. But if we were to use this particular construction here, we would optimize our Sharpe ratio here using this risk-free rate here, the zero beta risk-free rate over here, and we're going to get a quite notably different portfolio. It doesn't look like it's going to be that different, but just moving this slightly down here, this tangent hits slightly differently, we're going to get a different mix of shares. Now, in fact, we haven't used that particular construction because we thought we should have some constraints on our zero beta line over here. We haven't shown you the full line through here, but this is actually a zero beta point here where we have actually put in some a minimum variance here of 20%. Sorry, this is actually the same 5% minimum variance that we had SWIX weightings in our zero beta construction for our portfolio here. So we've limited the weights, if you like. So we get this point over here. And if you want to see what this portfolio is actually made up with now, you can see that we have got we've capped it at the maximum of 20% of any one share, a minimum of minus 20% over here, and this gives us a zero beta portfolio here. And this is also the minimum standard deviation point that we want to use as our risk-free proxy. Well, not a proxy. In this instance, this really is market risk-free at any rate, or was for that particular period. We can't, of course, know that it will remain that way in the next period, in the same way that we don't know that any of our portfolios will remain optimal. Now, if you look at the optimal portfolio that we've got there, you can see this is very different. Instead of ShopRite, we've got Truworths up here and Capitec and other shares here. So just a little movement down that efficient frontier can give you quite a different portfolio. Now, with that background, what we are actually interested in is looking to see whether the CAPM can actually give us a good estimate of returns in the next period. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the top 160 shares. We're going to update this every quarter. We're going to run from 1986 to 2016. So we're looking at about 30 years here. And we're going to use the first 24 months of the data. We're going to estimate betas with that, and then we're going to, in fact, estimate the betas with 60 months as well, so in two ways. And we're then going to look at the subsequent abnormal returns. So for the next 24 months, we're going to see how did the expected return, which we're going to calculate in two ways using the normal CAPM. So we're going to look at what the average T-bill rate was, plus the beta times the market risk premium to get our expected return. That's this portion here. And then we're going to construct the abnormal return by deducting that from the actual return in that same period. So we're also going to repeat this using a zero beta CAPM. So the only difference really is that we've got our, instead of the risk-free rate here, we've got a zero beta portfolio. And we're going to estimate these betas in two different ways as well. We're going to use the conventional way with covariances, and we're going to use Dimson's method as well, just to see if the beta makes a difference. And once we've done that, we're going to just do a paired t-test here by looking to see whether these abnormal returns are different from zero. And we are expecting, in fact, that we should have zero normal returns. If the expected return is exactly equal to the actual return, then we've got a fantastic model. It works very well. If it doesn't, then we're going to see that we get significant abnormal returns. So let's look at the results. So these are paired t-tests on 160 shares going back from 1987 to 2015. Now, the first table that I'm going to show you here is the expected returns versus actual returns of the original CAPM with a conventional estimate of the risk-free rate. Now, these are non-overlapping periods. We've done it in various ways. So this is using an ordinary least squared estimate of beta over 24 months. This is looking at it with a 60-month ordinary least squared beta. Those results are down here. Then we change the beta estimation method, and we are using Dimson over 24 months and Dimson over 60 months down here. Now, you can see here that we estimate the beta over the first 2 years, and then we look at the returns over the following 2 years, and we work out the actual return minus the expected return. We then do a t-test, and these are t-test statistics that I'm reporting to you here. And the significant ones are marked with asterisks down here. So down here we've got the 5-year periods. There are fewer of them, but again, non-overlapping 5-year periods. To summarize the results here, for the 24-month periods here, we find that in 11 out of the 14 periods, there is no significant relationship at all. In the 60-month periods, we find that in 4 out of the 5 periods, there is no significant relationship at all. We also find very similar results, doesn't matter how we estimate beta, between Dimson and the least squared method of estimating betas. You'll notice these asterisks are generally paired, occasionally not. But what this is really telling us is that the CAPM doesn't work. What returns, the expected returns were from the CAPM using the original CAPM model here with the T-bill risk-free rate doesn't help you to predict the actual returns. Now we repeat this. This time we're using a zero beta CAPM, as I explained earlier. And once again, we've got our data down here, same sort of thing. And again, just summarizing here, in 9 out of 14 periods, we find there's no significant relationship. That's using the 24-month constructions. Using the 60-month constructions, again, it's 4 out of 5 periods. And again, there's no difference really between these squares and Dimson betas. Now, these results are marginally better than what we found before, but they still are nowhere near showing us or convincing us that, in fact, there is actually anything in terms of the predictability of the CAPM. Furthermore, and you can't see it from this table here, in 9 of the 14 time periods, a negative correlation between the predicted, this is the zero beta blacks CAPM results, and the subsequent returns was found, indicating an inverse relationship, which we had found before, and so have others. In 2 of the 14 time periods analyzed, the risk-free rate generated was actually negative. So that doesn't really make sense. We do not live in Japan or in Europe or in the US. We wouldn't expect negative risk-free rates. So we're not convinced that the CAPM actually adds anything. We also just reran our style engine to have a look at what happens with the betas over time. And so this is essentially just an update of what we showed in 2012. These quintiles are quintiles of betas. So we've taken 160 shares. We have ranked them by beta. These are high betas descending down here to low betas over here. And we look to see what the subsequent returns are. We roll this, we re-rank these portfolios, these quintiles every quarter. And you can see here, the high betas, this is the red line here, are giving us the lowest returns. And conversely, the low beta portfolios, that's quintile 4 and 5, give us the highest returns over the period. And you will also observe that the gaps between these things continue to increase. This is a consistent pattern through this. And also the sequence of these goes red, blue, green, black, and green here, which is exactly the inverse of what we're seeing through here. So, and again, this is what this price relative is showing us here. That is just looking at the difference between the red line and the black line here. It goes pretty steadily downhill all the time, which shows us consistently that the CAPM, if it works at all, works backwards. So let me conclude by saying, firstly, the CAPM is dangerous. If you want to use it, then you need to at least realize that it's working backwards. The estimates that you're getting are going to you need to be looking at it as high betas are going to give you low returns. Now, our results, this inverse relationship, are also supported by other researchers. We're not the only ones who are concluding this. Pettengill, Sundaram, Matur in 1995 presented this. Frazzini, Pedersen in 2014, Lazar and Yassir in 2010. These are international studies, and our study in 2012, followed by a more recent one here. Then just to also just note here, Graham and Harvey in 21 commented that the practice of utilizing the CAPM in the business arena is partially due to the widespread teaching of the said CAPM in business schools. And so we need to be very careful about where we go with all of this. Thank you very much.